First time in like 270 episodes, I put a "the" in front of Castle of Horror. I'm sorry. All right. Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week we continue our Flatliners retrospective with a bonus episode, the 1990 film Jacob's Ladder, directed by Adrian Lyne. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have seen it. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, author of the upcoming Young Captain Nemo series from Fievel and Friends Macmillan Books. With me from Los Angeles, Adam Foshko is director of story development for Activision's Call of Duty, Skylanders, and Destiny franchises, including story consultant on the brand new, recently released Destiny 2. Say hello, Adam.
Hi, how are you tonight? Good to be back.
I am so excited to be back for a third Flatliners movie, even if we had to invent one and sort of just corral one in to make one. So, yes. Also, from the Rio Grande Valley, Professor David Bowles has received awards from the American Library Association, the Texas Institute of Letters, and the Texas Associated Press. To the dozen books he's written, he'll soon be adding Feathered Serpent, Dark Heart of Sky, Myths of Mexico, and the YA steampunk graphic novel Clockwork Curandera. Hello, David.
Have a good fucking day.
Wow.
the great line from the movie, man.
It is. It is. I actually was totally, yeah. Was that related to the post office? I'm trying to remember when that actually came up. But it's
No, it's after he's like been sick for a couple of weeks in the
oh right, and his
in his
girlfriend's
apartment,
like
and
sick
she's
of
just
his
like fed
sick of
up
his
with it.
shit. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I love it. Oh God, Elizabeth Pena is so fantastic. And finally, also in Denver, as always, color commentary from attorney Julia Guzman of Guzman Immigration of Denver. She's also a member of the improv choir In Harmony's Way. Say hello, Julia.
Hello.
Hello, an improv choir.
Acapella improv group.
Oh,
Oh,
not
that's
Yes.
only
awesome.
not only is it an improv choir, but they're an a cappella improv choir, which actually probably
Yeah.
is
We don't
easier.
call ourselves the choir. We're just a group.
You're a vocal consortium
Yes.
with no instruments. All right. Well, welcome. I'm glad that you could join us. Okay. All right. Jacob's Ladder is a 1990 American psychological horror film directed by Adrian Lyne, produced by Alan Marshall, written by Bruce Joel Rubin, who like went on a big head trip before writing this thing. And for real, I'm not just saying that. He really, really did. He like did his whole Eat, Pray, Love thing, and then he came back with a script, and this was it, more or less. It stars Tim Robbins, Elizabeth Pena, and Danny Aiello. The film's protagonist, Jacob, is a Vietnam vet whose experiences prior to and during the war result in strange, fragmentary flashbacks and hallucinations that haunt him. As his ordeal gets worse, Jacob desperately attempts to figure out the truth. So, we're going to get our opening thoughts. Let's mix it up. David, you have not opened in any of these three, so this time it's going to be your turn. Let's go David, Julia, Adam, and then I'll go. David, first thoughts, Jacob's Ladder.
So the first time I saw this, I was 20 years old, and I thought it was, an incredible film. I was blown away by everything up until like the end, and, like right after the revelatory scene about the ladder and what it is and so forth. The movie very quickly moved towards a resolution that for whatever reason, because I was 20 years old, I guess, I was not expecting. And I just like walked out of the theater like, what the hell was that? And I really haven't revisited it. I think I might have seen it one more time on video with my wife or something like that after I got married, but I hadn't seen it in like many, many years. And watching it now, with the benefit of many years of studying like Mesoamerican beliefs in the afterlife, I was really, really struck and kind of moved by the notion of the horrific in the afterlife as being a way to decouple someone's soul from their life, because that's exactly what like the Aztecs believe. They believe you spent 4 years traveling through the 9 layers of the underworld, Mictlan, the land of the dead is what Mictlan means. And along the way, there were like horrific things. There were like demons you had to face and monsters and winds that were made out of obsidian blades that would, slice your flesh, and other winds that would send your soul fluttering around like a rag. And all of it was meant so that when you finally stood before the Lord and Lady of Death, almost every one of your connections to the physical world would have been stripped away, and you'd be allowed to step. They would allow you beyond them into whatever afterlife. Not even the Aztecs dared to speculate about. Lay beyond for human beings. And so when I was watching this, I mean, I know that the writer was inspired more by the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but I found it like just really, really moving in a lot of ways that at 47 years of age, I can see where at 20 I didn't quite understand. So I really enjoyed it. I was really happy to see it. And now, of course, I understand that weird transition is because 20 minutes of the film were excised.
Is that
from
so?
From the film after the scene where that guy Michael reveals what the ladder is, and then Jacob goes home to the apartment that he had with Sarah. And so there's 20 minutes of film missing there. And now that I understand and I've read what those scenes were, I get a little bit more about what happened. So
okay, let's get a little bit into those later because I'm curious about that because I don't know anything about any excise scenes. Okay, all right, that's a heck of a that's a good start. Julia, first of all, do you remember? You're the one who brought us to this film because you really wanted to see it. So what's your opening thoughts?
So so the reason I even connected these, because this is all my doing that we did these movies, because I had this image from 20 whatever years ago it is. I had this image in my head of the weird faces and the weird, shaking head effect, and I, in my head, decided it was from Flatliners. And so then we were watching Flatliners, and I was like, oh, I just remembered that's not from Flatliners, it's from Jacob's Ladder. And Jason just looked at me and was like, you're kidding. He's like, we're watching this movie because of you having a memory of one scene, and it's not even from this movie. I'm like, sorry, but so I was like, well, let's do a Jacob's Ladder anyway, because I know that, and I mean, this is again spoiler, but they are both about the bizarre stuff that happens to you when you're dying, or when you've just flatlined or whatever, and how you may have these weird visions. Of course, I mean, this isn't how anybody describes near-death experiences, but both of these films have interpreted it to be like you have all these weird visions and all this weird stuff happens to you. So that's how I'm tying them together, Adam, because I feel like it's a really interesting exploration of kind of what goes through what goes through the mind of the people creating these films as to what might go through someone's mind when they're dying. So that's my
I just want to point out that's I'm not that worked up about that, but even if I were, it would be very effective revenge for me making Tony watch Embrace of the Vampire. So that's
anyway. But my first thought really is that I didn't really remember very much about the movie, but I remembered that it had a tremendous impact on me, and now I know why, because it really is a disturbing film. It's not so much a horror movie, it's a psychological thriller, but there's a lot of horror elements to it, I believe. And something I'm really excited to talk about in this film is, our daughter, who's in high school, took a class last year that really affected her, like really impacted how she takes in all kinds of works, of literature, of movies, or whatever. And she shared a lot of what she learned. This is her language arts class. She shared a lot of what she learned with us, and I was tripping out watching this movie because I'm like, because it's all in here. Like a lot of the things we watch incorporate all these themes that Jason was like, well, I don't use this I don't use these formulas when I'm writing, but apparently people do, because a lot of them are in this movie. And it's
like what? Stuff, like, give us an example.
An example is that when someone is going to die or is dying, there will be bells ringing. And so there's in this film, the Salvation Army Santa is ringing a bell right over Jacob. Yeah. Or there's stuff about water being rebirth and fire being like a phoenix, like coming back,
cleansing.
Like, from it. And he does that. He has the fever and then the being plunged in the water. There's all these things, and so I was super excited to revisit some of those themes, and I know you guys, both being super professorial and all that, probably know some of this. But for me, it's like ninth grade language arts level, and it's not even my language arts class. But so anyway, so I'm excited to talk about this film. I really glad we watched it. I liked it a lot. I thought it was super disturbing, but very interesting.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Adam, what are your thoughts?
Well, I saw this film actually when it came out, and I remember not. I think I was mostly just shocked by it. I didn't like it. I think because I was just sort of. Yeah, I think it was one of those films that if you weren't prepared for it, you weren't probably in the mood. If you weren't in the mood for it or prepared for it, it was kind of a shock to your system. But it was definitely visually stunning, and I think I was also left with the images of the super fast shaking, which actually became iconic. The super fast shaking heads with the facial occlusion, sort of everything else. That became a thing for a while. And what I did appreciate about it was the fact that it was very visually stunning, not in sort of the bigness of the kinds of visuals it was using, but actually rather kind of the small and sort of insidious ways it was using visuals even at that time. For me, but in the reviewing fairly recently, I really enjoyed it, and it was I think it was enough time has passed, and I was definitely more prepared for it. I really had wished, and I think we talked about this a little bit earlier. I really had wished that they'd used a lot of the same sort of style that I saw Adrian Lyne use in this in the updated version of Flatliners. Despite the fact that now that I've heard your theory, I'm like, okay, I get it. But I would like to have had some of the same the symbolism and sort of the richness of this film, which is very specific and very dark and sort of barren in some ways and rich in others and very bleak in certain areas. I would like to have seen a lot of the same sort of extremely deliberate use of symbolism. I think more in Flatliners, but it was refreshing and interesting to really look at this film again and take it from a completely different perspective. And it was really great. I really enjoyed it. Borrowing on things like Incident on Owl Creek Bridge. If you go all the way back to that sort of that story of things that happen in the gaps between an event and the end of someone's life. But I think this was true psychological horror in a city which is certainly psychologically horrific at times. It certainly was in the 90s. What was so great about this is it felt like it was in the 90s, but because of the film stock and the lighting and everything else, apart from the symbolism, it was depicting pretty much New York of the 70s and that sort of extremely gritty, incredibly shitty. It becomes like a Popeye Doyle kind of version of the city and the demons that sort of work their way through the city. And if you spent any time in clubs in New York or LA or anywhere else, not just in the 90s, but even nowadays, it's not surprising to see all kinds of craziness. So it really gets you this movie gets you in a headlock and doesn't really release you for a while. So it's a really interesting movie, and I was really glad to revisit it. I would not have, I think, otherwise. I think I had just set it aside and just called it an oddity once upon a time. But I was glad we got in. I'm eager to talk about it.
So, first of all, really quickly, just so I understand, in fact, I'd like to start with this question of just the environment that we're placed in, both the one that we would recognize instantly and also the ones that are more symbolic. But New York itself is very much a huge part of this story. Visually, Adrian Lyne shows us a New York that you guys have told me is 1975. Did I miss a slug somewhere where it says New York 1975? Because that's what all the literature says too. But I don't remember there being that subtitle. I remember it says Da Nang 1971.
No, it's just you have to infer it because he talks about it's been 4 or 5 years since.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Since Vietnam and stuff like that. Yeah.
So I just missed the line of dialogue. Okay. All right. So it's the mid to it's basically the early to mid 70s in New York City. And I think what amazed me most is how grimy and uncomfortable and just horrible this city appears. His clothes are just wet from just how yucky it is everywhere. He's stepping in goop every surface seems to have grime on it.
Oh
It
yeah.
looks like a city that's impossible to keep clean. Um, Everybody looks like they've been sweating for days and they're cold. It just it's amazing just how much this film, being made in 1990, is an attempt to recreate at least a notion of what New York
Yeah.
could be like.
And of course, the director is aided by the fact that he doesn't have to get it exactly right. He has to get it right enough because,
Yeah.
spoiler alert, it's like not really 1975. So
Right.
um
That's
And
right.
it's like
No.
not really.
and in
It's
fact,
like not really New
and
York.
in fact, spoiler alert, there's no way that Jacob could even have any idea what New York in 1975 would be like. So there's also that.
Yeah, but I mean,
But he would know what it was
for
like in
us,
1971. So it's
but
close
for
enough.
us, for us in the 1990s, looking at that, I mean, we have the advantage of it being, 2017. But back when this thing came out, it looked, having been I'm a kid, but I was, in New York in the 70s. I was New York in the 70s. It was pretty darn close to it. A reasonable approximation for those of us that were kind of watching it. I think even down to the film stock that was used and the way that it was lit. That more than an environment, it was sort of like, as opposed to Dante's Inferno, which is sort of like the impression you get out of, most of it. It's just the sense of that the city itself is a character in the same way that any of these sort of, like the weird faceless, creatures are. It has that same sort of, it's sort of it's recognizable as human, it's recognizable as the city, but there's also something to it where its face and its eyes are covered, and there's something darker to it. It's not entirely human, and the city the same way. It's not entirely the city. It is an occluded version of it. It is.
And there's great callbacks to like Taxi Driver and The French Connection.
Sure.
But in like subtly, darker and more sinister ways, and so that's all fantastic.
I was thinking of this movie with Jason. Who's the guy who played just Jason Miller, the actor who played the priest in The Exorcist, and there was a movie where it was called The Nickel Ride, where his job in the mob, he's like a middle manager, and his job is just to control one like warehouse and just deal with the crap that comes in and goes out all day long. That's what it's about. It's about this guy in the mob who has like the most pedestrian, like almost legit job that ever existed. But it's in this kind of New York. It's in this New York that just seems to be covered in 3/4 of an inch of film all the time. And it makes me amazed because you read people's journals and their memoirs, and they go, and I was so excited to get to New York and begin my career doing blah. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, if this is what New York looked like, it's just hard to imagine that anybody was super excited. But of course they are, because the city is alive, and it's where everything's happening, and I get it. But and also, as David said, this is not real New York. This is nightmare fuel New York. That's only the worst part, and it's been amped up, beyond
Drug
beyond reality.
hallucinations, supposedly.
Yeah,
Right.
it's the Princess Bride version of New York, where it's really just the worst part.
Right. That's
Princess
that's
Bride.
that's very good. Yes. Yeah, S. Morgenstern is giving us his bad parts version of New York City. Uh, so okay, but we open the picture up actually, supposedly several years earlier than that, in Vietnam. And I have to say, when I first saw this opening sequence, where Jacob is just one of this unit in Vietnam, this looked to me like any other Vietnam movie. And in fact, when everything starts to go wrong, they seem to hit an ambush, and some of the guys start foaming at the mouth and falling to the ground. My thinking was, and I think what the movie wants you to think, is, oh, they've been hit with some kind of chemical attack.
Agent Orange.
I'm going to stop you there and say, because I think this is already a question based on what you guys were saying earlier, based on something Adam said earlier, is I think they are. I think they actually are hit with, they actually have been given that chemical by the Army that's supposed to, because the whole thing is at the very end, there's a little closing
Yeah.
legend
Well, there's
thingy.
a solution to the mystery. We'll get to it.
Yeah, that says, that there's a drug named BZ that was given to people to increase their combat abilities. So I actually think that they are. I'm not sure that that's not true what we're seeing at the beginning.
No,
With them
maybe it is, but
having
we don't yet know. In other words, all of the enemy are unseen, and so
right.
we don't know where the Viet Cong are attacking from, but we can pretty much assume it's the Viet Cong, and and some of the good guys are falling to the ground and frothing at the mouth. So we think there's a chemical aspect to what's going
And by
on.
the way, all that talking that they were doing, a lot of that was improvised. They were just kind of
It
shooting the
sounded
breeze,
great,
so that was cool.
and what a great
Yeah, it was
cast,
great stuff.
by the way. I mean, it's so
Oh
cool
my
here.
God, yeah.
Yeah,
Some of those actors, to see them that young again in the 90s is like, wow.
yeah.
It was
Yeah.
really fantastic.
I mean, it's barely the 90s. This came out in 1990. You got to think this
Yeah,
is being
1990.
filmed in like
Yeah.
89,
Yeah.
You got Ving Rhames and
Yeah.
Eric LaSalle. Who else is in there?
Well, yeah, and the Ving Rhames and Tim Robbins stuff was all improvised. So when they were just like going back and forth,
Yes.
just
Yeah, just yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Taylor Vance, who this looks like so different here than he does in other more like sinister roles later on, and it's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Great cast.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of wonderful characters just showing up all over the character actors, and people will know later, because later on Jason Alexander is going to show up.
Oh yeah.
Esapatha Mark
Seinfeld.
Murkison from Law and Order shows up. I mean, so many, like you can
Louis
have a good
Black
time.
is the evil doctor. Oh my God. Did you catch that?
No, I did not
Yeah.
catch that.
He was
I
like,
did.
Wait,
Louis
wait,
Black
wait, wait,
plays
what? What doctor? Which doctor?
Which doctor?
Louis
Not the witch
Black
doctor.
plays...
What doctor?
I'm pretty sure it's Louis Black who plays the doctor, like the evil doctor down in
the hospital
where they strap him down.
There's
and
a lot of kind of evil doctors. You're talking about when he's saying
No, the one who straps
dead?
on the gloves and his like, Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go back and see that now.
He plays one of the doctors, and I'm pretty sure it's the one. The one who's like, you're dead or whatever. Yeah.
Oh
yeah. I'll have to go back and check that out because I didn't notice that. And then of course Danny Aiello, who is the
Danny Aiello is awesome.
the angelic chiropractor.
Yeah.
And he's one of the few times that, like, it's so funny. The Vietnam bits are lit warmly, and they're kind of lit because it's the jungle or whatever. But still, it's lit warmly, and all that stuff is pretty warm with the oranges and everything else. And all the city stuff is extremely green and cold and kind of everything else. It's all lit in a very stark way. And when you get back to Aiello again, he's got that backlighting on him.
Yeah.
Obviously.
There's the scene where Jacob actually says, "You look like an angel," which is like, okay, that's a little on the nose, but yeah.
It's like you tell me that every time.
On the nose stuff here, but I mean the thing I like is there's a whole bit different in the beginning where you're dealing with directions, visual themes like paths, being lost, sort of intermittent.
This is what I'm talking about. Yeah, this kind of stuff is fascinating to me. Like this whole idea that going into the woods and being lost in the woods is dealing with the unknown. See, I'm saying, like, you guys probably deal with these scenes all the time, but for me, this is all like, oh, that's so cool.
And actually, more important, than the faces, what's interesting is the occlusion, like the idea of things covering the face or things covering the eyes. This is all sort of a thing that, there are these interesting visual motifs, these visual themes that are kind of running through it. It's kind of fascinating how that's all sort of, it kind of runs. Well,
there's lots of, that kind of symbolism is like throughout. So there's the one scene where he's in the elevator and they're like pennies plugged into like the broken bits of the mirror, like the pennies that would be placed on the eyes of the dead so they could cross over into the
or the coin
to the afterworld.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
The first thing that he sees when he opens the door to his apartment is the dog, like the hound that guards hell. There's the ravens at the raven, and ravens are psychopops. They, accompany the soul to the afterlife. All its stuff is interwoven really
kind of runs throughout.
Yeah, it's basically very daring that way, where it doesn't bother hiding the fact that it's putting these symbols out there.
When he wakes up on the train, the very first thing he sees is a sign that says hell.
Right.
And then it's like, remember?
And that's actually what happens after Vietnam. I just want to point out how crazy it is that even though the character Jacob says Vietnam was worse than New York later on, because he's talking to the guy who was a hippie, he goes, shows how much you know that you'd want to go to Vietnam. The fact is, other than the part when suddenly they get attacked and lots of violence happens, Vietnam looks a lot more comfortable and warm than New York City. I mean, in other words, It's like New York City.
And here's
Vietnam
something to think
looks
about.
inviting. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, here's something to think about. So this guy goes to Vietnam with a PhD, so he could have gotten a deferment. The fact that he went, and obviously, like his son had died. So I mean, there's a lot of things that are not really spoken about that are just under the surface. But this is a guy that was fleeing New York and fleeing, the loneliness and sadness and bereavement that he felt, and going to this place where he was with a bunch of men who are just laughing it up, and their lives are on the line, but it's warmer and there's camaraderie, and he can escape all of this other stuff. So I definitely think it's done intentionally.
The Oliver is that right? The Oliver Sacks book, The Man Who Mistook his wife for a hat. He talks about it deals with memory loss, basically memory loss and various different brain diseases. And there's this one person that he interviews who says that he never felt more at home and alive than during the war, and the rest of the time he felt like it's not memorable, like his brain just won't even attach to it. So there's a pathology, but there's also it was just remarking on the fact that life felt more real and lovable in a sense during this heightened time of the war. Which is awful, but that I hadn't thought about that though, David. What you just said, the notion that the son had died and then he goes to the war. That's just really interesting.
Right. Yeah. Well, and he's also divorced. Remember, he's like his son has died, and then he's broken up with his wife and kids. Broken up with his wife and she has
which often
happens.
2 kids. I mean, nothing drives people more apart than death of a child.
So all the more reason for him to want to to get the hell out of hell.
So tell me again, how does it work, Adam, David? Who knows? How did at that point in 1971? Is it the case you could get a deferment if you had a PhD? Because chances are,
yes.
If you were in school, I mean, you could presumably if you were well educated, I don't know exactly how it would work, but one would imagine if you had an advanced degree, you probably weren't going to the front line.
Yeah, because
it was something you could get a deferment if you could demonstrate that your professional abilities, because of your degrees or whatever, were necessary for society or whatever. So granted.
But it wasn't because
apparently
he's working
has a PhD in philosophy, so maybe that wasn't particularly useful.
No, not just that. He had kind of given up his career and was just working at the post office.
That's after.
So I don't know that.
After Vietnam. He comes back.
I think he was already at the post office before.
I don't know. I don't think so. I think
that information is not given to us.
In my mind, though, my headcanon, right? My headcanon is kid die. I mean, he gets his doctorate. Kid dies.
Right.
He volunteers to go to Vietnam.
And
the reason I think he was at the post office is because in one of his visions, in one of his delusions, he wakes up in bed with his wife, and he goes, "I just had this dream that I was living with that chick that I work with at the post office." So that's why I'm like,
but in that vision. In that particular vision you're talking about, he then goes into his kid's room and Gabe is still alive. So that's like an alternate universe. Yeah. Right. That's a good. Yeah.
He may not even have gone to Vietnam in that version. Because it's very possible that he wouldn't have gone to Vietnam if he hadn't been so depressed.
By the way, he doesn't. I can see why you're thinking about the post office, because you're wondering, why is the post office even a part of his dying visions of himself if he doesn't have anything to do with the post office? But I think there might be something. Well, I don't know.
You asked that like you knew the answer. I was ready.
For this. Well, I'm speculating. So my speculation is, so the author studied things like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and so he probably also knows that like the Chinese afterlife is very much like a bureaucracy kind of, where things are getting stamped and passed around, and there are different levels of officials and things like that. And so to me it seems like this is just like an entry way into hell. It's
the other thing is that it's all about transition. It's all about he's a guy who's lost when we first see him. He's a guy who's on the move. And think about, he delivers mail. But I mean, this is all you could make the argument. This is really about things that pass through his influence and through the post office are all things that are in transit. They're all going somewhere.
Yeah.
They're all things that are there's nothing stationary. It's the endless kind of the endless movement of things from A to B that kind of pass through but don't stay. And it's there's this whole notion
that's a great way of thinking of it.
Well,
it
and
seems
he's
like
a shitty post
like
office employee too. I mean, he's
there is
part
that.
of that. It's exactly as you say. Things are moving back and forth, but at the same time, he's a terrible post office employee because he wants to skip work and go investigate, wacko things and look people up and
Go to his
do
chiropractor.
go to his chiropractor. And I love the notion. This is another super cynical idea because all of this fits. If we're watching this and we don't know that all of this is a vision, it all fits within the prejudices that we have in our head. That the post office is made up of a heavily unionized bureaucracy that is so poorly run that its employees can just sort of wander around and never actually do their jobs, and nobody will ever bring them to account. And
I don't
you
think
know
anybody thinks about the post office. When I
you
go to
don't
the
think
post office,
so?
I'm always like, "Good Lord, these people are work hard." But
I'm not.
anyway,
No, I'm not saying I believe that, but I do.
yeah.
I do think that's an idea. Especially in 1990, I think it's an idea running around that unions have sort of run crazy and they've destroyed people's work ethic and so on. And this is also the time. Remember that going postal actually became a phrase. Like it
Right.
didn't
Yeah.
exist before then.
Yeah, that's true, right.
And
Yep.
of course that is based on the other way around, that those guys are being worked so hard
Right.
and
Yeah, that's what I
they're
think
so
of.
controlled that
Is
they
just
start going nuts.
they lose it.
But
Yeah, I was gonna say about the chiropractor thing that I bet chiropractors love this movie because it really does make them seem like angels and heroes, and apparently they actually had a chiropractor who was there coaching Danny Aiello the whole time so that he would do things the right way, and like other chiropractors have been thankful that in fact it looks just like how it would be.
When you crack his neck, don't tear his head off. Yeah, okay.
yeah, I mean
It's
it's very strange.
It seemed like it was very careful. Although what's interesting is when you look at if you've been to a chiropractor, things look a particular way. But as you're in the context of this film, you're looking at even before you're really getting a good look at Aiello and sort of the angelic
Yeah.
backlighting and everything else. When he's first working Tim Robbins over, it looks like a torture device, right? It looks like he's like laying. It's so funny because even what's so odd is he seems like, again, a guy who's on the way somewhere and is lost. And even so far as when he asked him to turn over on his left, he goes, no, the other left. It's this sort of like, this whole notion that it's a question of being lost and not knowing direction and not knowing which way it's going. But he's in this torture device, which is the craziest looking thing. It's in his office, and I'm sure these are real things, but it looks horrifying when you see it for the in the context of this movie. And then as Aiello kind of is revealed to be more potentially angelic, then it really becomes interesting. But boy, initially it just looks horrific.
Yeah. And the thing is, and to me, that's part of the whole theme of this, which is what appears at first to be horrific and painful is necessary. And so, it is pain, but that it's pain that he needs to experience in order to get better, in order to move on.
I have to read the quote that he says because I loved this quote and it fits with what you're saying, David.
The one from Meister Eckhart?
Meister Eckhart,
right. So he says, Eckhart saw hell too. He said, the only thing that burns in hell is the part of you that won't let go of life, your memories, your attachments. They burn them all away, but they're not punishing you, he said. They're freeing your soul. So the way he sees it, if you're frightened of dying and you're holding on, you'll see devils tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels freeing you from the earth. It's just a matter of how you look at it. That's all. So don't worry,
Jesus.
okay? I think that's such a beautiful concept, and I think it's really deep because it actually applies not only to this but to life. It's where you go through horrible experiences and you can see them as I've suffered, I'm a victim, this is an awful thing, or you can see it as something that has helped. It's like what they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's something that has helped you figure out who you really are and find out what's really important in life and just get through something and be stronger. I think it's a really beautiful sentiment. So I just love
But
that.
beyond that, it's even letting go of, it's specifically letting go of what's important. In fact, completely.
Yeah.
And
Well, that's the whole Zen,
I
the
mean,
whole
because,
Buddhist
well, that
idea
makes
of,
it
of
slightly
attachment.
troubling, the whole business of, clearly this is going to be a long process, because when we get to the end, and a loved one of his in the afterlife leads him away, if he had been actually working, if he had actually succeeded in that process, the presence of a loved one wouldn't be meaningful. But I just want to
Yeah.
point out
No, I don't think
the
that's it. I think it's that he
yeah,
can finally let go of his
dang.
earthly attachments, and then the idea that loved ones are there waiting for you when you die to
Okay,
help you
but by the
transition.
time you're ready to go, by the time your soul in the world of that ALO seems to be describing, by the time your soul is ready to be sort of just poured into the universe, to become a part of whatever it is and then do whatever is to be done, that attachment will be gone also, I think.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, in this worldview, which is not like it's, although he does the screenwriter, the original screenwriter, before the director convinced him to allow him to change some of the symbolism and the imagery and so forth. He really had rooted it a lot in a Judeo-Christian kind of view things, but in Eastern, and as I mentioned before, Mesoamerican traditions, it's this notion of you eventually have to let go of everything. But after 4 years, the Aztecs would no longer mention the name of the person who was deceased, because they were believed to have, in the same way that they have been shown the way to release all ties to Earth, and Earth had to release all ties to them.
can I just
It's
point
really
out?
kind of fortuitous. I'm
Oh
sorry.
no, go ahead, David. I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, as an aside, it's really fortuitous that Julia picked this movie, because I'm actually in the midst of writing a middle grade novel about two kids from San Antonio who get selected to be the new Lord and Lady Death to rule over the Aztec
Awesome.
underworld, and this philosophical notion that we're talking about being able to accept death and accept the fact that you're moving on and that you have to let go, and that the people on Earth also have to let go of you, is kind of at the core of it. Of course, dealt in a way that middle grade readers are going to be able to understand. So I was watching this going, oh, that's a great idea. I'm going to steal that.
Yeah.
I'm going to steal that.
You can
Mhm.
steal
So it was
from
great
this
research.
like crazy. Especially considering it's nearly 30 years old. I think
Yeah.
you're all right. I just wanted to point out that there's that same thing you were thinking about, the burning out. That Thornton Wilder says that in Our Town, strangely enough. There's the point where you move forward in that play, and many of the characters that you followed earlier in the play are all dead. Many of them are also that were kids are now grown up and so forth. He just moves moves the action forward. But when you begin, the sun comes up on the cemetery of Grover's Corners, and many of the characters are just sitting in chairs, and these are the dead, and they're commenting. And
Yeah.
the stage manager has this amazing speech where he talks about what they're doing, and he says, I just looked up this line, and it says, they stay here while the earth part of them burns out and burns away, and all that time they slowly get indifferent. Isn't that interesting? I mean,
It is.
and this is a 1938 play by Thornton Wilder that is done in high schools all the time, but it never dawned on me how much what an idea that is, and what a sort of non it's not per se non-Christian, it's extra Christian. It's just sort of
Yeah,
it's
extra Christian. That's a
it
good way
has
to put it.
it has no relation whatsoever to anything that we learned as Protestants. It's just this notion, and you're telling me it's Buddhist, then it may well be that's where he grabs it. I have no idea.
Well, yeah, no,
Um,
I was saying about the Buddhist idea of detachment, but not. I think that was something different from what David was talking about. Another thing I wanted to mention, as far as the metaphors that our daughter taught me, is the idea that flowers have different meanings, and the rose, which is the most desired flower, is you have to go through pain to be able to pick it because of the thorn. And at the end, when he goes into the house, there's these pink. I think I remember that there's pink roses there. I feel like that was where that was, but I remember that Jacob is like looking at roses at that point. So
Yeah.
anyway, but that's just I think it's really neat that and yeah, some of it is on the nose, but I think it's really neat that they just are so committed.
I'm not
to
troubled by that at all. To me, something can be obvious as long as it's handled well. I'm down with
Yeah,
it. So yes, it's
I think there
Yeah.
are layers. There are layers to it. I think some of it is extremely clear, and some of it is certainly less clear. I think there are layers.
Yeah.
Some is certainly less obvious than the others. I think they're just, I'm not sure when I first saw this exactly how much of it I may have done at any given time, and some of the more obvious stuff may have been, more important for movie audiences back then, and and this is a good number of years ago. But I think the layering is maybe one of the things that maybe continues to make this thing work reasonably well. It isn't entirely on the nose, although some of it really is.
Yeah.
It seems like there's enough layering in it to continue to make this interesting. And the film definitely still works in a lot of ways. And certain parts of it feel super claustrophobic and feel kind of strange and feel, and like it's all moving in a particular direction. And you really do kind of feel like you're drawn into this journey that he's on.
Yeah.
And it's still extremely effective. I mean, you would think that this is a story that we all know pretty well, and
Yeah.
this particular trip is one that we've seen, if not done exactly this way, then done in ways that are similar enough to where they're not as new as they would have been when this film came out.
Sure.
But it's still extremely effective. And it worked remarkably well. There's really no point where you go, too much.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. In fact, I thought it was richer. Knowing the ending and knowing what's really going on made the experience so much richer. You get to spend time like savoring, for everything from the clues to like the little, tips of the hat. But just like, understanding fully what is going on, you're able to like, I don't know if you enjoy it, but you're able to like, kind of like revel a little bit in this like really dark journey that he's got to go on to let go. And I mean everything from from his reading Camus' The Stranger to like all the other books like Purgatorio by Dante or Things Fall Apart. It briefly pops up when he's looking through the drawers. Just all these like really really neat little things like the song that's playing when Jezebel starts dancing with that weird demon creature is James Brown's My Thing, which is from his album Hell.
No kidding. No kidding.
Yeah. So but it's just all this like really really clever and fun.
It's wall to wall. But what I like is that if you're not thinking of that stuff, or if it's your first time through, the temptation is to follow the thriller plot that's going on, which is pretty prosaic. And this is not a complaint. This is the way it works. That's a pretty straightforward prosaic plot. There's something going on. He and his unit are beginning to remember things that happened in the war. By gum, he's going to prove it before more of them die. Somebody's killing them, and that's that we've seen that plot before, right? You could actually have made the movie about that, and
I suspect the remake will be about that.
Oh yeah. So before we started recording, there was apparently there is a remake. The a website that David found, and I think I saw the same one now, seems to say that nobody will say exactly how this remake relates to the first film, if it's a real remake, and somebody said that somehow it is an homage, a reimagining, whatever the hell that means, about two brothers. And so it might not even be like, I don't know. We
modern day paranoid action thriller about two brothers. That is the description.
What does that even mean? I don't know. I don't know. Because that could mean anything. The Danny Aiello character could be his brother. It doesn't. You know what I mean? I mean that could mean anything. They could say, "Oh, let's take the angel." Physical therapist and turn him into the brother. Fine. I just have no idea what the hell that's going to be. And that doesn't make me feel good. The idea that movie is coming out about a year from now and nobody can say precisely what it's about does not, especially after we just saw Flatliners 2017. That does not make me Think about
Well,
it.
the cool thing, I'll tell you what, the cool thing about this remake is that it stars Michael Ealy, who
Okay.
is just a
I don't
really
know that.
fantastic actor. So
Well, there were a lot of people in Flatliners. I mean, there were a lot of people who were actually
Oh
really
yeah,
good.
that's a good point. It had Diego Luna, for God's sake, and it still
Yeah.
I mean, it was
reprehensively
lined
bad.
up to actually be pretty good, and it was like, no.
Yeah. So, but you know what? I've been surprised before. Sometimes,
Sure.
So hey, we'll see what happens. Uh, I want to switch for a moment and say I don't know if you guys are carrying it around in your head right now, but the soundtrack, I should say the score to Jacob's
This
Ladder
score.
is just gorgeous. It is
Yeah.
really really amazing. It's from Jarre.
Maurice Jarre, yeah.
Yeah, and it's heavily like piano. It's just this sound of sadness most of the time. Because much of this time as he wanders around either looking for clues or just wandering aimlessly, it's sort of the wet outside in this hellish version of New York, and the piano just plays and is sad for us, and it's pretty amazing. I mean, I really really loved this score more than I usually, to be honest, don't really notice scores very much, but this one really really struck me as amazing.
Yeah, no, Jarre is just incredible. I mean, it's the guy who did Dr. Zhivago and Dead Poets Society, and I mean, he also did Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. But hey, he wasn't responsible for Tina Turner's songs.
Yeah. Ryan's Daughter, Lawrence of Arabia.
Totally,
Wow.
that was an incredible soundtrack. I love that soundtrack.
So this guy gets around, or got around. Actually, he's dead now. But yeah, so that was gorgeous. And as much as a composer has at his beck and call as big an orchestra as he wants, typically for a movie like this, it's mostly a score just driven by a piano, and it's pretty beautiful. So we talked about the music. We talked about the symbolism. I do want to talk about the women in Jacob's life. When Jacob, let's presume that he doesn't meet. Let's presume a world where all fantasies are true. When Jacob goes to Vietnam, he is still married to his lovely wife, with whom he has 3 children in a small but very comfortable and warm-looking apartment in New York. And
the one child has already died.
I'm talking about before Vietnam, before he goes to Vietnam, before. Yeah.
Right.
And,
yeah, but what I'm saying is when he goes to Vietnam, the child has already died. Yes.
Yes. All I'm saying is he has this wife who's like a picture of kind of it's not suburban because it's Brooklyn, I suppose, but of sort of suburban normalcy, of expectation of what you're supposed to be. A guy like Jacob, probably this is precisely what he was supposed to be, is married with kids, at a young age.
Married to Georgie from Sisters.
Right. This Georgie from Sisters. Yes. No, that's true. And his girlfriend that he gets when he comes back to Vietnam is kind of the exact opposite. It's this sort of multicultural, exotic, Cuban, sexy, dancing.
And that's what I was reminded of when I was watching this. Was, oh my God, Elizabeth Pena was so sexy in 1990.
Oh yeah.
Jesus
my God.
So cute. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Because I remember having an enormous crush on her when I was 20 years old. I was like, holy snap. I hadn't met my wife yet. I was like, así quiero que sea mi mujer. I want a woman like that.
It's like, I'm not married yet. I'm holding out hope that I will meet Elizabeth.
Yeah, that Elizabeth Pena will say yes when I talk to her.
And have you ever seen the Friends episode? It's the one with the list.
Oh yeah.
Where they make a list of who they're allowed to sleep with after they're together with the person or whatever. I guess they were married, but anyway, did she make your list?
There you go. She would have been on my list, and my wife probably would have said, "Okay, I understand."
She is so beautiful, and Elizabeth Pena shockingly died just a couple of years ago. And
I know.
that was a complete surprise. At least at least to me. I mean, you didn't read a lot of articles in on the web or anything about her, having problems. Apparently, she died of cirrhosis of the liver. There's no way to say that, and it's not sad. It's sad,
Yeah,
But
it is.
here, oh, she's beautiful and she's wonderful, and she has to read a lot of really strange lines and put up with a lot of really crazy stuff, and she's wonderful the whole way. But anyway, think about it. So like white bread, tall, gangly, goofy, extraordinarily Caucasian Tim Robbins envisions, what if I left my wife and our comfortable life and our 3 children and our warm apartment, and instead I was with sexy Elizabeth Pena, and all we do is just lay around naked and then go to the post office.
And my
That's
question to you then is, again, back to the post office thing, is this a person he's actually ever met before, or is she just completely created whole cloth from his
I'm going to tell you, when I talk to you about the deleted scenes, there's some indication of like what it is that she's supposed to represent.
Why don't we get to that now? Because I think we're at a good point now. We can talk about deleted scenes, and I think we'll just go to our final thoughts, because we could either talk about this for 7 more hours or sort of move to that. So yeah, talk to me about what got cut.
Yeah, so there was, when they first showed the film to test audiences, a lot of people said there's just,
by the way,
it's overwhelming.
I love any story that begins with that sentence. But anyway, go ahead, continue.
They were like, this is overwhelming. We're not sure what the hell just went on. And he kind of like, and talking to them, realized that the most confusing part came from the latter half of the film. Like right after Michael, the chemist, reveals this drug, the ladder, that he helped to test on first. I guess he says jungle monkeys, and then on some of the Viet Cong, and then on their own soldiers. There are 4 major scenes that get cut. So the first one is where Michael gives him an antidote for the ladder, and he thinks he's cured. And he's so excited that he's cured. He goes to buy a ticket or a bus to Chicago, but then he goes into the bathroom, and while he's in the bathroom, weird shit starts happening, and somebody pushes like a little piece of toilet paper through like a hole in the stall that says you're dead, and the weird like blood is coming out of the sink and stuff like that. And then he goes back to Michael's apartment, like, hey, what the fuck? I thought you cured me. And he finds Michael decapitated. And he's like, oh, shit, so this is still going on. And then the scene right before he takes the taxi back to his old apartment where Sarah and the kids live, there's a scene in his apartment, his grimy apartment, his final like confrontation with Jezebel. And so in the scene, and you can, all these scenes, you can find them on YouTube, by the way. In the scene, yeah, they're kind of like grainy or whatever, but Jezebel starts going through this transformation. Her head is doing that weird twisting around thing, and then her face is occluded in the way that Adam was talking about earlier. And he reaches out and he draws this like veil off of her face, and it's him. Jezebel is him. It's like the part of him that is clinging to the world and so forth. And once that's revealed to him, once it's revealed to him that this whole thing, it basically reveals to him, oh, okay, I get it. This is the part of me that's like clinging to the world, and she's anchoring me here, and like I can like let go now, and that's why he's able to go to the apartment and then like go with the son up the ladder now to like wherever. So kind of interesting. But the audiences were very confused by all of that shit.
Yeah, no kidding.
And in the scene where she's transforming that like weird demon that she was like, getting nasty with on the dance floor comes back and intermittent cuts or whatever. That shit was crazy. That whole dance scene, that was nuts.
Yeah. Because when you were talking about how it started out being kind of more Christian, but then it brought in some other themes. That's a particularly Christian theme of confronting this demon, this devil. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I thought of there. And then what about the meaning of the name Jezebel? Like, because I always think of it.
Yeah, no, I mean that's definitely a biblical allusion to Queen Jezebel.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
I
I don't
Temptress,
remember
right?
I don't remember what the story of Jezebel is because I'm not a biblical scholar, so I just didn't know if it was.
I don't remember either. All I know is that the name always got used in popular culture for a deceitful
woman.
Yeah. So she was Phoenician, right? And she marries a prince of Israel named Ahab, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then the prince becomes a king, and now they're king and queen of Israel. But she doesn't worship the God of Israel. She continues worshiping Baal, the nature god or whatever. And the prophet Elijah is always calling her out and talking bad about her. And I'm trying to remember if she did something particularly bad, but I do know that her court threw her out of a window and killed her. That's the one thing that she was just not a good person, according to the Bible.
Well,
to me, she seems like the classic temptress kind of thing. And so, if you think of this thing that he's going on as the classic hero's journey, right? The monomyth, and he's descending down first into the depths. And so there's a point where he's got to have the confrontation with the goddess, that's Jezebel, and then there's the atonement with the father, which is coming to the atonement with the father probably is his scene with Danny Aiello where he's calling him to let go or whatever. It's in that way, like a lot of things, it's classically structured as a monolith, and then he rises up out of that darkness into the light at the end.
I want to call out a couple of other things that are really cool to look for here. I think if you said, "Hey, Jason, what do you remember about Jacob's Ladder?" I didn't remember the shaking head effect that everybody loves. I did remember being plunged into a bathtub. The bathtub of ice. That thing where he and think about this. This has zero special effects. This effect.
I turned to Jason when they're pouring the ice in there, and I'm like, they're actually pouring ice into the tub that Tim Robbins is in, and Jason literally did a spit take with his coffee. I don't know why that's so funny, but
I think your phrasing was really spot on. It was like they're really literally pouring ice on Tim Robbins. But no, I mean what I mean is this is low tech. This whole it's hey, the doctor says you have
low tech. It's all practical special effects. None of it is post production.
But
really
I mean,
visceral. Very, it's very New York is gritty. Everything seems really extreme and very physical. Whether it's the sun, or whether it's the city, or whether it's the ice, or it's all seems very low tech, very visceral.
Being rolled in the gurney down into the guts of that insane hospital, and it gets increasingly stranger and stranger. From first, there's just a patient curled up on the floor, and then suddenly there are other patients moving, and then there's a cage above them, and people are crawling. It's so that
was very also very similar to Flatliners, because all those visions that they have are like that, where everything is just really disgusting. And
but there's a whole lot less neon in this picture.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, absolutely. There's a lot more going on. Yeah, for sure. But in a way that one thing that's very much like Flatliners is that this is yet another hospital that would not exist in reality. Now, the excuse this movie has is this movie is completely, the hospital here is completely being concocted in the dying mind of Jacob, whereas the other movie was being concocted
in Vietnam under drugs.
Well, and Flatliners was just being concocted in the mind of Joel Schumacher, which is different. And
the gorgeous, sort of glorious, hospital with mood lighting.
Yes.
Yeah, and stained glass windows, like they just took the church over.
Yeah, and with no human ever saying a line of dialogue that explains any of that, none. You're supposed to just understand all that stuff without the characters ever bothering to explain why we're using an empty church or whatever. Here, I've been in some dingy old hospitals, but I've never been in one where there's literally wet grime just sort of dripping down the tiles of the the walls as you go by.
No.
This is a nightmare image. Can we think? Can you guys name how many movies can you think of off the top of your head? Maybe there aren't that many. Where and we have talked about this, but in the moment, as Adam said, between when the person is grievously injured and when they die, how many movies take place within that blink? There's definitely this one. There's the occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge,
Right.
which Adam mentioned. Can you think of any others? I can think of one, but I don't.
So it seems to me that there's a certain point, and even with all that jazz, I think occurs.
Yes, yeah. No, you're totally right. All that
Like,
jazz. Oh my God. Yeah.
there's
Spoilers for all that
that.
jazz, by the way, just so you know.
Yeah, in case you thought you were really watching all that jazz. Yeah, of course you're watching show tunes. It ends badly or great, depending on where you stand.
I love
Yeah,
that jazz.
that was
But
a
then
surprise in the theater,
yeah.
by the way. That was like, oh my God.
What the all that jazz ending? Yeah.
Yeah, the all that jazz. Yeah, I mean, I think I probably saw it on television.
Oh,
or
it's
something.
rough. It could, if you're not prepared for that, it can make you very sad. But yeah,
What's another one where
Carnival of
where
Souls.
you
Carnival of Souls does it.
Carnival of Souls? Like, yeah, that's a
By the
classic.
way, spoilers for Carnival of Souls. So I'm sorry about that.
Did they continue that throughout? Did they continue that like in the remakes of Carnival of Souls?
I never saw it.
Well, I know they exist. I don't think I've ever. I know there are some, but I have to sort of guess whether
I
they
don't
actually
think
did.
so. To be perfectly honest with you, I believe that the remake did not do the same story, which makes no sense to me at all. I mean, if I were doing a remake of Carnival of Souls, first of all, I would go straight out to the Saltaire Pavilion and I would do it out there. I would just do it up and just literally remake the same movie.
Right.
Yes, but those are the only
And that would
ones I
actually
can
might be really
think
good.
of. Let me see. Are there any others that are a good example of movies where the person is dying? Yeah, I can't think of it.
Memento is.
I know
Memento,
there are, but I can't. Yeah.
Isn't
The Sixth Sense
isn't what?
isn't he is
Oh, the
well
Sixth
Sense,
Sense.
but,
Yeah. Okay.
but
Yeah.
I mean, you're
yeah
already dead. I mean, yeah, it's already
yeah
that's
Jason,
off. But that's pretty good though.
yeah. What's that, Joy?
isn't Memento one of those? Or am I
Is
just
it?
making that up?
Yeah,
I don't.
except he's not dead though. It's just he's
Or
just.
what's the one with what's the one where Robert De Niro is dying at the beginning? It's like I'm thinking of where it's like the whole thing, the whole rest of the movie is what happened to lead up to the point.
Robert De
I mean, that
Niro.
sounds like what is that? I mean, that sounds like. I mean, there are
That's
films like Sunset Boulevard that
that
kind of
sounds like
have.
frantic, kind of, or
I don't know.
what's the okay?
Anyways,
Well,
yeah, it's something.
we'll
I'm
leave that up
thinking of
to the people on the
right.
page.
Yes,
Um,
that's your homework. Is suggest other movies where the whole movie's about
Well,
somebody dying.
there's one where somebody's dead, and it becomes a retelling from the point of view that you know that he's dead.
yeah,
I mean, this is one of the ones where they pretty much where the last image is like, whoa, he's dead. You go, oh my God, okay.
it's pretty
You know,
gutsy though, because like my fear always with that, and this is where we should just go to our final thoughts about this movie. If you reveal at the end that the main character is dead, there's a tendency to say, well, then who cares? Why did it go through all of this if the main character is
Yeah.
dead? Like, what was the point? Especially if it was all a dream. If it was all just the imagination of the main character, then who cares?
Right. But I don't
Well,
think
they
that this
make
is the imagination of the main character. So
no,
Okay.
so like
they,
yeah. So
they
shall we
make
do
it-
our final
they
thoughts so
make
we can kind of
Yeah.
answer that question?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Answer
that's
the
a good idea.
question.
It's a great idea.
Go ahead, David. Yeah.
So and this can serve as my final thought. So my feeling upon rewatching it and like knowing full well what's going on is that there's like a layer of his imagination over things, but these are real events. He is actually the beings that he's interacting with are real beings in some place that he's passing through. The recommendation he's getting from Danny Aiello to let go is like real advice he's getting from someone real. That character is not something he's made up in his mind. I mean, that's again, there's no like real evidence in the film for that either way, I guess. But it feels very clear to me that we're supposed to take it not just as like everything is made up in his head and it's just like a hallucination in his dying moments, but that his soul is slipping away and that he's trying to cling to life and he's being encouraged to let go. And so when you look at it that way, the stuff that happens in a film does matter. Every single one of those things is leading to his being able to let go. And if to me, the other version is just not. I don't know. It's not palatable. That it's just all just his imagination, just his hallucination as he dies. So I mean, I think the film. Yeah, I think the film is really great. I enjoyed rewatching it. Definitely something I would recommend to people. You've got to have a strong stomach, but I mean, it's not even though some of the tropes that are created by this film, because it was a really influential film on things like Silent Hill and a ton of other horror franchises. Even though those tropes have lived on beyond it, this film is trying to say something really deep about the human condition, and so it's not like it's using horrific images, but to say something like I think really, really meaningful about our connections to the people we love and how difficult it is to let go of that. His difficulty in letting go of life is like a reflection of the difficulty of his letting go of his son. And so, I mean, I just think it's looking at it as a father. I see it as beautiful in ways that I couldn't appreciate when I was 20 years old. And so, definitely a film. I actually, in order to see it, I had to purchase it because I couldn't find it very easily any other way. Or I mean, I guess I could have rented it on YouTube for $2.99, but I decided, $7.99 on Amazon. I'll go ahead and buy it because I think it's a movie that I'll revisit later, a few years down the road. I think it's worth revisiting, and I definitely recommend it. A very original idea, daring in a lot of ways, and well executed. So
wow,
that's
very
awesome.
beautiful, very beautiful. Julia, what are your final thoughts about Jacob's Ladder?
Well, I have really enjoyed this conversation because, like I said, I did not. You know how they say education is lost on the young or whatever.
Yeah.
I feel like for sure language arts was lost on me when I was young because I just didn't care about it. And now I'm like, I kind of wish I could go back to school and revisit a bunch of works of literature and really listen to what the teachers say because I'm like, this is also interesting to me. So I really enjoyed that, the going back to school with you guys a little bit. And that's been a lot of fun. But like I said, I think it's a really interesting picture, to use Adam's word. It's not like anything else that I've really seen much of since then. And I just watched it again and I was thinking, wow, I've forgotten so much of what happened, but it just really stuck with me, and there's a good reason for that. So yeah, I really appreciate you guys taking this journey with me. That's all.
Well, beautiful. By the way, you could there's all these things like the great courses and stuff like that you can do.
Yeah.
So if if this is something that's really important to you, I'm sure we can figure it out. So
you could also accompany your daughter to school, which would make her very happy.
Totally. I'll just tell the teachers, don't mind me. I'm just going to sit in the back. It's nothing.
Well, a couple of years ago, and I only cracked like the surface of the surface, but I decided I would try and read a bunch of things that I was supposed to read when I was a senior in high school and didn't. And it was really great because I read stuff like The Chocolate War, and just all these books that I remember everybody talking about that I had never read. And it was wonderful. It was like a wonderful couple of months, just sort of filling in all these gaps that I didn't have. But as you're well aware, it never ends. There's always more, there's always more gaps. So yeah. Adam, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I gotta tell you, it was really great revisiting this film. I spent a fair amount of time actually studying Adrian Lyne and as a director, and when you think about kind of where he came from, and it's interesting to sort of hear him talk about how he came to directing his first feature. He did a couple shorts before he actually did Little Foxes, which is you kind of go Little Foxes, and you draw a line to this, and you go that's quite a line, and to see kind of where he went after that, but it's interesting that he came sort of by way of, music videos and by way of everything else. And if you look at the Michael Sambello sort of stuff that, he did before, it's an interesting thing. It's extremely visually rich, but in a way that's sort of unexpected. And I think, it isn't nearly as bright and as bold as you sort of expect. The fact that, when it's painting a very stark picture of New York, and I still believe that the scenery itself is sort of a character. I think there are a lot of subtleties to this picture that we don't really sort of because they're actually sort of well constructed, they're not so obvious, so there are different layers. So some things are super obvious, and for everything that you point out and go, that's really on the nose, there are 3 or 4 or 5 things that are less so, whether they're visual or whether it's in the dialogue or whatever else. So I think it's actually a film that you can revisit. And I was surprised how well it held up between the time that it came out and then I had seen it and the time that I sort of had touched on it this way or that, over time, but really now sat down recently and looked at it with, more seasoned, more experienced eyes than I did sort of way back then, and I could see a lot of the artistry that went into it, and just was able to appreciate the story, the visual story of it, the composite story of it more and more, the journey of it. I thought it was really, really good. So it was really great to revisit it in this way and to sort of see what kind of a director Adrian Lyne is. Certainly was then, and we really haven't heard a lot from him in quite a long time. I think it is in France. But I think it's an important film in a lot of ways. I think it was visually rich and so stunning, and it makes you feel a certain way. What's interesting is I'd be interested in kind of seeing. I don't know the history of the script to see if it really ended entirely the way that it did, and what the test screenings were like, or whatever else, how the studio may have helped to shape its ending, because it's a remarkably happy ending. It's not even really bittersweet exactly. It really is sort of played out. It's a real shocker, but it sort of it plays out in a sort of really nice way. It's a very well put together film, and I guess I really enjoyed revisiting it and really taking it apart and just trying to get a sense of it. And there's so many things that I think this influence. I mean, the shaking head thing, and the and the occlusion of the eyes and the face and all that, and the sort of the muslin cloth over the face. I think we've seen that effect in other places before, and I think a lot of it came from the sort of the stunning impact of how it was used here. So I think it's had a real impact. And it's interesting when you think about Robbins sort of at the time that we were sort of seeing him in this. It was really interesting. I don't think we knew kind of what to expect from him when this picture came out.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I think it was. I think it's. I think in the area of Flatliners, there is that is very physical, leaning over into sort of the, I don't know, we'll say spiritual. I won't even say metaphysical, but I'll say definitely sort of spiritual. This seems extremely spiritual. This seems like it. I could see where it ties into it, even if you could mistake one for this being in the camp of Flatliners. But I think it is really one of the more interesting movies that I think you can encounter in this kind of milieu, where you think that it's a psychological horror picture, and it has you chasing your tail kind of through the unfolding of the story, thinking it's this or that or the other, and really it's about the last few moments or the last half an hour, whatever it is, of a man's life. And it does it in an interesting artistic way, and kind of thought provoking. And for all the things that are kind of on the surface, there's a lot more I think that stay with you. This is definitely a film that stays with you, and you kind of process it more a little bit later, and you try and go, oh yeah, that's what this was. For everything that you recognize, there's always something else that kind of is tucked away in the back. And I think that, apart from the script, I think that's Adrian Lyne's work. So I think it was really good to revisit it, and really good to see it even in the context of that, even insofar as it holds up remarkably well. Flatliners, I mean, the first one, that's a movie that was great to see everybody when they were younger. And it was fine. It still had all the flaws that it did back then. And it certainly was okay. It was great to sort of look at that, because it was like looking through the lens of nostalgia. The Flatliners remake, I think we all pretty much looked at that and went, okay, I don't know if we actually needed one like this, but it was interesting casting, and it got made, and that was fine. But this is, this, I would argue, held up better than really any of those things, and I think it will have. It has a longer life than certainly Flatliners, the remake, will have in as many years in the future. So this thing really does. You can show it to a modern audience now, and you either know Tim Robbins or you don't know Tim Robbins, and or you know Adrian Lyne or you don't, and it really doesn't matter. It actually it's held in a time and a place that you're either familiar with 70s New York or you're not, and it doesn't matter because it plays either way, and you get the sense of it. It could be, it's Dante's Inferno for you don't have to be, incredibly familiar with, the time and the place for that to all play out. It actually holds up incredibly well. And I think that's one of the things that surprised me about it. I really did think that, there's so many times you see a film from a certain time and you go, that is so far right, no modern audience is going to pay any attention to this. But thematically and visually and, it all really still does work. When you sit down and you view it for the first time, I would argue that you could put this in front of, modern audiences and they would still completely get what this is. It wouldn't matter. All the elements still work incredibly well. They would say the cars are gigantic, but that's about pretty much all you would really say. I mean, some stuff is still totally novel and arresting and disturbing, and it deals with the human condition, the spiritual condition, in ways that I think are remarkably good. And I think the language that it uses is still extremely effective. And that's really what you want, right? You want stories, and certainly visual stories, that transcend time and still deal with things that speak to multiple generations. And I was really shocked more than anything else that this held up as well as it did. I really was. It holds up better than I think, certainly the first Flatliners did. That's definitely a period. That's a time and a place picture, and it's fine for that. But you have to be like, I love the '80s for that thing to work. This thing, I would say that it's timeless, but I would say that it definitely holds up incredibly well and is just as potent, if not more so, now.
Very cool.
Amen.
I have nothing to add to all this. I mean, I think that you guys have summed it up beautifully. I want to I mean, we've discussed this one a lot, and I do want people to weigh in on the Facebook page if they can think of more films that are like this, or if we've missed something important. But I want to get to endorsements. We've entered October. It's like a very important month to a lot of people to catch up on horror movie watching if you haven't been watching any. And as you know, I've been watching some Euro trash. So let's get into what would you endorse? And we're starting with David. David, what do you have? Do you have anything for us?
Yeah, well, my endorsements this week are inspired by this film because as I was watching it, and I was like, oh, I know what I want to recommend. And so the first thing that I thought of was the book Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World by Haruki Murakami, Japanese author. Really fantastic book. And the reason that it came to me, it's kind of like a cyberpunkish, half of it is like a cyberpunkish kind of book, almost like a William Gibson kind of thing. But the other half is set in the dying moments of a man's life, and it basically takes this notion of subjective time and posits that the final moments of your life, time slows down so much subjectively for you that it's essentially eternity. So that you essentially, from your own perspective, have eternal life because each moment slows down in this kind of exponential way to give you this kind of eternal life, and you live within this very strange afterlife that is constructed out of your own mind and your own memories, stuff like that. And so it is a really stunning book by one of Japan's greatest authors ever. And anybody who's wanting to continue exploring some of these kinds of things ought to check out Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. And the other one that I was thinking about, and it came to me when with the opening scene where Jacob was reading the Stranger, I thought of the play No Exit by Jean-Paul Sartre.
Sure.
The French writer. That play is great. That's the one that has given us the famous line, hell is other people, because it's basically a room full of people They find themselves in the room, and they're trying to figure out, why are we in this room? Why is there no door to get out of it? And they start talking to each other, and they find that they despise each other like very, very deeply. And then they realize that they are in hell, and they will be in that room with each other forever, and they cannot stand each other. And it's like much worse than any demon or pit of fire or anything like that. So it's definitely.
I liked that work a lot better than The Stranger, by the way. Just FYI.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not a big fan of The Stranger. No, it's much better. I agree with you. Yeah. And then the last thing is, and this is going to require that I spoil some stuff. So, but I think it's good spoiling. So one of Lost was like my favorite TV show when it was on, and the final season 6, caught a lot of flack because people who were like either watching it cursorily or didn't watch it and just like caught little things, were glommed on to this what was going on when it was revealed towards the end of the season, and they said, see, they've been dead the whole time, they're in purgatory, because it is revealed that some of the things that are happening in season 6 are happening after their death. But it's kind of important to understand that in season 6 of Lost, there are two different things going on. There's action that's happening in the present on that island that they're lost on, and then all the other events that appear to be happening like in an alternate reality.
Yeah,
those
where they
are
never
happening
crashed.
Exactly. It's an alternate reality where they never crashed. All of that is actually happening many, many years after the final scene of the series, like conceivably decades and decades in the future, where all of the characters are now dead. They've probably lived full lives and grown old and died. And in the afterlife, they've created this way to come back together because their experiences on the island were so important that they wanted to be able to find each other in the afterlife. And so
dude, now I gotta go, but now you're gonna make me want to go back and watch the whole damn series. I'm like, that's not right.
Yeah. Because the thing is, they were at the end of season 5, the creator started saying, instead of doing flashbacks, we're going to be doing flash sideways.
Oh my God.
And they were deliberately obscuring the fact that what they're going to be showing is something that happens, after these characters die, but like again, like decades in the future. And so all of it is happening in some kind of reality that they've constructed together to find each other after death. And when you watch it, that way, it's kind of. I mean, because I rewatched it. The first time through, I was so shocked and kind of bewildered and so forth in the finale, that I was upset. But when I rewatched it, knowing what was going on, it was kind of like rewatching Jacob's Ladder. I was like, okay, I see why they would want to come back together. I see why their experiences together have made them a family. And in the afterlife, they would want to find each other, and so they would find some kind of way to bring them together.
This is going to be something that we discuss at some point. I mean,
I know, right? Like my head is exploding right now. I'm like, I don't think that's.
But I've had conversations about this, and in some cases with people who kind of were involved with the show, and I'm kind of like, what? So I just like, I want to talk about this, but I have a feeling it's going to be a long discussion.
It would be a very, very long conversation.
I remember the flash sideways was a term that they used when they were promoting it. I will say, Joya, if you decide to watch your way through Lost, just let me know when you're done, and I'll just ask you. You're
gonna move out for a couple of weeks. Is what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean,
Well, you can also go look online. There is a sort of a viewing. There's a viewing path you can also pick up as well, which is sort of like here are the essentials that you sort of want to. You don't like watch every single episode. You kind of watch this one. That carries you through the various seasons. There is that. It's sort of been,
that sounds awesome.
Together.
A way to like watch the essential episodes and just get the gist of what's going on.
Right, and I think there's a way to navigate your way through that, which in retrospect, doing it retrospectively is way better.
Sure.
Not even because it's sort of presupposing that you're going in a particular direction, but just because you're kind of omitting the things that aren't necessarily part of the critical path.
Yeah.
The ones that were.
I feel like I need to do that for the X-Files too. Go back and watch all the X-Files that way.
Like perhaps the polar bear.
Episode,
perhaps the polar bear could have been done without from Lost. I'm just guessing.
Yeah.
What I always loved about Lost, by the way, was I kind of wish that my own life, like whenever I suddenly remembered something, that there would be this like that sound
Like a
effect that they
whooshing
always
sound.
used.
The
There was
whooshing.
always this like
The
kind of like
yeah.
noise that would lead into memories or commercials. Either way,
Yeah.
I was like, I wish the transitions in my life all were accompanied by
We're
that sort of
accompanied by some
I
kind of
just
sound
want
effect. That
I
would.
just want the I just want the Law and Order to tung.
gong gong. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well,
The transition.
thank you very much, David. That's wonderful. Julia, do you have anything to endorse for us?
I wasn't going. I didn't have anything until David started talking, and I was like, I've got one. So just based on what you were saying, my favorite, and I may have talked about this in the past. I have a feeling I probably did, because one of my favorite books of all time is Dr. Brian Weiss's Many Lives, Many Masters, and it's a book. He's a psychiatrist who didn't believe in reincarnation and past lives and all that, but he did do regression to earlier parts of your life with his patients, and he had a patient who regressed past before her childhood into another life, and he was so taken by all the stuff that she said and knew and languages she spoke and whatever, that he decided to write a book about her experience, and has in fact become sort of now like a past life guru guy. But he's amazing, and he's like super legit, extremely well educated psychiatrist. I've met him. I've done a workshop with him and everything, because he's just so fascinating. But I love that was the beginning of my fascination with all that stuff. And it's Many Lives, Many Masters. And so if we're gonna talk about what happens after you die and past life and all that, then I feel like that's a natural
That's one of my wife's favorite
recommendation.
books too.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Yep, that's it.
Wow. Thank you. Many Lives, Many Masters. All right. Adam, do you have anything for us?
I'm taking it and spinning it the other way. I mean, Jacob's Ladder and even this conversation has gotten like way deeper than Jacob's Ladder takes you down a different direction. So the palate cleanser du jour is basically binge watching The Tick.
Oh wow.
Is on Amazon, and that'll definitely do it. And I have some of the people who were involved in the original version, and even executive producing on this one. But I came into it having read the graphic novel, the Ben Edlund graphic novel, and kind of everything else. And so I kind of sat and just in an effort to sort of pass the time, I was like, I'll watch the pilot. I found myself just continuing to sort of watch it, and I was sort of vaguely charmed by it, and I thought it was really good. And I have to admit, it was great fun. It captured a tremendous amount of what's fun about that world, and those characters. I'm sort of interested in seeing where it's headed. It was very interesting. So it's a complete palate cleanser to all the stuff that we sort of have been watching, and it is far from it's not deep, but it has a certain depth when it comes to the world that it is describing and is constructing, and there's a firmament to it and a depth to it which was surprising. It wasn't serious, but it felt firm enough to be able to support the story as it was going. And so I it was one of those things that I said, that actually worked remarkably well. And I found myself, once kind of I got started, I wanted to keep watching it, which is a refreshing thing to encounter when you're consuming any kind of medium. And before I knew it, I'd sort of gotten through the entire offering of whatever that season was. And so it was actually, it kept my interest. It was a lot of fun, and I have to admit, it was really good. So I would recommend it. It's on Amazon.
Wonderful. You remember a couple of weeks ago I promoted Red Oaks, which is another Amazon series. I'm really loving the Amazon series that I've gotten into recently. So that's that's fabulous. Okay, mine is that was still pretty sublime. So we had deep, we had sublime, and this is banal. I am absolutely going to throw you something that is just banal, but I have to throw it out there. So last week, first week of October, was all about Eurotrash, and I was loving it. This week, I think it's going to be, for me, 50s horror. And today I was looking at this movie called Blood of Dracula, not to be confused with Taste the Blood of Dracula, not to be confused with the Andy Warhol movie Blood for Dracula. This movie is Blood of Dracula. Blood of Dracula is not a Dracula movie. It's not even properly a vampire movie. It is, in fact, a 1959 black and white girl gang movie about this gang of girls who are really not that criminal, but whatever. Who, they're tough, and this girl gets sent to reform school, and she's being kind of recruited into the girl gang. And then this psychiatrist that she's seeing is doing this experiment in altered statesy kind of regression to sort of unlock the hidden aggression or whatever the hell. I don't know why you would do such a thing, but whatever. She is doing
Oh.
this hypnotic experiment that turns our heroine into a sort of teenage werewolf, and
So like
it
the
is
Michael Landon movie,
it's
but
it's ex-
not.
actually it's actually almost a rock solid perfect remake. I would presume about a year and a half later of I Was a Teenage Werewolf. It's kind of the same movie, and so it's if everything I've just said to you, black and white girl gang 1950s vampire, sounds like something you would like, this is precisely what you were picturing. It is exactly that. So I totally recommend it. It shows up. I think it's in public domain now. It shows up on Daily Motion. You got to watch Blood of Dracula. So there we go.
Wow.
Yes, I brought it all down past Earth, and there we go.
That's
So.
great.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for being on. It's been a really fun retrospective, and I hope I get to talk to everybody again really soon. And
It's
if
okay.
you are,
We're planning to poison Drew and Tony's food, so we'll be on again. Don't worry about it.
and
You know what? We have to say this disclaimer at the end of all the episodes because of Jason, and now I have to throw David in there. No, the rest of us do not advocate poisoning people or tying them up or
Wow.
You
in
rubbed
any
off
way
on me.
criminally.
well, I'm often saying that it really matters to the show if people, more people listen, if people leave reviews. So I would suggest, if you like the show, that you should kidnap your friends and make them listen to the show.
No.
And everybody
And
points
we
out
always
that
say
no, that's not what.
Threaten them
the
with
views of
poisoning.
Jason Henderson do not reflect the views of the rest of Castle Horror Podcast.
But definitely leave reviews. We want to hear them. We want to hear from you on the Facebook page. I know what's coming next. We are going to be doing Halloween 3 next, and then
Oh,
we've
yeah.
had several suggestions, and we're going to talk internally and figure out what we're going to do after that. But in any event, thank you very much, guys, and I will talk to you all soon. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. Bye, guys.
Thanks a lot,
Bye.
guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.